do you remember the Calgary Strikers? Kickers? I always have to ask the question, as here we are in the next episode in my Remember the Calgary series. This is episode number 11, as we'll continue looking back on Calgary sports teams from the past. As when let's say a combination of taking in the Calgary Hitman Corral series, as well as seeing the inspiration from See It Dead Clothing, as well. There was that Chris Wilson story that I put those links in the description below in the videos that I talked about those in the past. That inspired me as a Calgary sports fan to do this Remember the Calgary series, to look at Calgary sports teams from the past. And when I was mapping out my episodes, I couldn't believe how many teams there has been in the past that represented Calgary. But in this particular episode, when I was naming them, actually when it comes to the soccer team, as you could say, it's kind of a 2-for-1 deal. That actually first it was the Calgary Kickers, and then there was the Calgary Strikers when there was an ownership change in the Canadian Soccer League. This team existed back in 1987 until 1989, and they played their home games at Mewata Stadium. So that's the first. There was actually the Kickers and Strikers, but when I named this particular episode, I thought Strikers and Kickers sounded better. That's my opinion. But that's what the team, or teams in this case, we'll talk about in this episode. In the last episode, you can see right here, I talked about the Calgary Boomers that were in the North American Soccer League. What was unique about that team is that they had an indoor and an outdoor team. And that team was the first of professional soccer teams that Calgary's had. So when I was mapping episodes, this is the part where we'll talk about soccer teams. So I'll bring up my notes here, and as always, it's the usual suspects that I get my information on Wikipedia, and then I find some other interesting sites where I'm able to find some graphics that I can use to show for many teams. And for the case with the Kickers and Strikers, or Strikers and Kickers, depending on how you want to look at it, there was definitely have some information on teams and a few jerseys, but this team only lasted for a few seasons. Me personally, even though I was around when they had the Kickers and Strikers, I was like 5 to 7 years old at the time and not really a huge soccer fan. I didn't remember these teams being around myself, even though the history does not predate me, unlike some teams that I've done in the series. So let's continue on and start off this episode. Kick things off with the Calgary Kickers. As it states that the Calgary Kickers were a Canadian soccer team and competed in the Canadian Soccer League. So there was a Canadian Soccer League that housed many teams all over the country. And this was from 1987 to 1989, so 3 seasons that we had a Calgary team in the Canadian Soccer League. 1987-88 were the Kickers, and then the last season, after the ownership change, they were the Strikers. I always tend to joke, so yeah, it's very, very original names for a soccer team. Call yourselves the Kickers and Strikers. And I know that maybe in some way there's some legacy of the Calgary Strikers. As I know when I used to live in the Northeast, if you go Monterey Park near 68th Street, just north of 16th Avenue, which is Trans-Canada Highway, in that, strip mall near where the co-op is, they were, as I know, there's still a Calgary Strikers soccer store there. That's the one I could think of right away that dawns the name. And this is a line of, history of soccer teams. I mean, we had the Boomers, now we're talking about the Kickers and Strikers, and there'll be a couple more teams I'll talk about in the next episode when I about to tee that up. And then right now we have the Cavalry Fc, which right now is still in their second season, playing at we have the Canadian Premier League, which I would say is a step below than the Major League Soccer. But we do have a soccer team called Cavalry Fc. They play it's actually called Acco Field at Spruce Meadows. I haven't taken in any Cavalry games before, everything going on in 2020, but Spruce Meadows is way, way down south, and I know initially they had issues with parking and trying to get, to the game, but that could be something I might, check down the road. But that's interesting. But that's what some of the legacy I would say of some of the soccer teams that we have had in the past. Right now with Calgary, but there's not really there. I mean, there's pockets, of dedicated soccer fans in Calgary, but I would say there's a reason. And I would also say the league, when I touch on the whole league as a whole of the Canadian Soccer League, that the league was under shaky times and folded themselves because the league existed from 1987 to 1992. So that's the gist of the Calgary Kickers and then Strikers. And they played their home games at Mewata Stadium, which is where the Mewata Armory is right now at the west end of downtown. As well, the Calgary Stampeders used to also play in Mewata Stadium the first 15 years of their history before moving into current McMahon Stadium. So there's another kind of Calgary Stampeders tied in as well, as the Boomers actually played their one season outdoors at the McMahon Stadium, and then the indoor they actually played the Stampede Corral, so you can see that episode. So yeah, it's enough going on about this, the gist of the team. But as I say, the history, well, there's actually a little bit of history that goes further back. According to the Wikipedia page, it says the Kickers' genesis was a team formed in 1953 and represented Alberta interprovincially several times, including winning the 1974 Challenge Trophy or the Canadian National Championship, held exhibition matches against the professional sides such as the Edmonton Drillers. So there was an Edmonton Drillers soccer team that actually played in the North American Soccer League prior to the 1987 season. Actually, there was 2,000 season tickets sold for the Calgary Kickers in their first season, so there was some initial excitement here. And then the Kickers, they joined the CSL, the Canadian Soccer League, for the league's inaugural season in 1987, and you could probably say this definitely was the best season of this Calgary soccer franchise, as that season they were the team's best. They had a record of 11, 5, and 4, and I think they break it up as that's 11 wins, 5 draws, and 4 losses. That's different than, we traditionally look win-loss tie or overtime or shield loss when it comes to hockey in the regular season. And then they hosted the championship game after overcoming the Vancouver 86ers in overtime in the playoff semifinals. I would say what inspired the Vancouver 86ers name, well, I was very young and I do have very, very, very faint memories, but I was only 4 years old, but Vancouver hosted the Expo, the World's Fair, in 1986, ahead of the Olympics that were here in Calgary. That's, I'd say, inspired that name. And then on October 6, 1987, the Kickers won the league titles. That's where I say this was the best season for this Calgary franchise, as they won the league title, the first league title that the Canadian Soccer League had, as they won 2-1 over the Hamilton Steelers. Another team that you gotta wonder, what inspired that name for Hamilton? They are known as Steel Town. Nick Gilbert of the Kickers was the league's leading scorer, and I know that Nick Gilbert, you could say, was probably the best player that played for the Calgary franchise. Yeah, I know he did play also for the Canadian national team for soccer. However, that was the height of the Calgary Kickers, as the Kickers were unable to sustain their success as they fell to a 6-6-13 record, which is 6 wins, 6 draws, and 13 losses. So they definitely had a huge hangover from winning the league title, as under the next season they were under Keith Wilson and later Dave Randall. So there were 2 coaches that led the Calgary Kickers that season. And in the playoffs, actually Calgary still did actually make the playoffs. In 1988, they lost to the Winnipeg Fury in the Western Division play-in. Yeah, that's a play-in series. That also sounds familiar. Round 2 games, nil, and then they did not score as they lost the first game 2-0, and then they lost 2-1 in overtime in defeats. And in 1988, Calgary also played each of the West-based teams in the Western Soccer Alliance teams. These games counted as WSA standings, so they played in a different league, even though Calgary was not a member of that league. So it's something interesting to add in. And following the 1988 season, the team folded. So the Kickers folded, and the players were dispersed via draft due to unpaid wages. Nick Gilbert, the star of the Calgary Kickers, had been traded for cash and a draft pick to the Toronto Blizzard. So we briefly had Nick Gilbert and then went to Toronto. That was the end of the Kickers. However, as you recall, I called this episode, well, the Strikers and Kickers, because I felt that sounded better. In 1989, a new community-owned team named the Calgary Strikers purchased the SCHL franchise, so we had a new ownership, as I mentioned at the beginning, that this is the Calgary Strikers under coach Tony Towers. But the team did a little better than the previous season and on and off the field, as they had an 8-3-15 record, so they were still under 500 with 8 wins, 3 draws, and 15 losses. And by September, this is where it was really rough for the Calgary Strikers now, as player injuries and player availability due to finances affected results, especially the final away game, which they only had 12 players, so they were already short on a roster, and I think you only have 10 on the field, and if that player is ineligible to return, you definitely play short-handed for the rest of the game. The team was back and forth in competition for third place with Winnipeg in most of the season. They earned it with a late season surge of 3 wins, including winning their final game 3-2 over Winnipeg. The third place finish meant they got to last in the Western Division playoff spot in the playing round against the Edmonton Brickmen. I'm going to guess maybe the Edmonton Brickmen, that name might have been inspired by the furniture chain The Brick, as that's where the Brick headquarters was founded. I'm just guessing at this stage now. Not too sure what inspired the Toronto Blizzard, I guess, the lake effect snow. I'm just throwing it up. At least those games, I would say, a little more original than the Kickers and Strikers. So it was the Edmonton Brickmen who eliminated the Calgary Strikers in this case. They defeated them 3-1 and 0-0 at the end of the season. After the season, despite private individual rumored to be interested in operating team in 1990 finding the money for the community-owned team to travel for the playoffs, the team folded. So that was it for the Calgary Kickers, who existed for 2 seasons, in 1987 and 1988. And then when the team folded, local team, community-owned team in 1989, we had the Calgary Strikers, but it sounded like they struggled on and off the field. And ultimately, after 1989, the team folded, and that was it for this Calgary soccer team. So, as I say, soccer is definitely tough, not only in Calgary, but in Canada in general. This was also fresh off of what inspired this league, is that Canada, the first and only time that Canada has made it to the World Cup of Soccer was in 1986 in Mexico, and as I recall, Canada did not get out of the qualifying round, and they did not score a goal. And then maybe there's hope that Canada, maybe by default in 2026, will be in the FIFA World Cup, as it's tri-hosted by Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. So maybe, and they're looking at possibly expanding the tournament where from 32 teams to maybe 48 or 64. That's what I've kind of heard, but maybe Canada will actually be in the World Cup in 2026. That's what inspired these other leagues, as there was a soccer boom in the 1970s. So now that's talking about the Calgary. Let's just talk about the league as a whole, as that this identity of the Canadian Soccer League, there is one that still exists under a different identity in Ontario, but this one we're talking about, where the Calgary Kickers and Strikers were in, existed from 1987 to 1992, as that they were originally a Division I professional soccer league that operated as the 8 years that I mentioned. It was nationwide, and the franchise has had teams in 6 provinces over its history. And it talks about there was Dale Barnes was the commissioner from 1987 to 1991, and then there was just an East to West division, and it ranged from 6 to 11 teams in the league. And then they were in that CONCACAF Confederation, with the North American and Caribbean nations, and how the FIFA divides up their nations that's a member of. Most titles, well, there were the Vancouver 86ers actually won the most titles in this league with 4 championships. So we actually did beat a team that you could say had a dynasty in the first season, but Calgary won the first title. TV partners, well, they were on TSN, the sports network. Level on pyramid, it says 1, and then it says International Cups. There was the North American Championship Cup. So as I say, this league was formed after the 1986 World Cup, where Canada was in that tournament, the first and only time as of this recording, when it was hosted in Mexico. And ultimately, this, or if you see familiar with TSN, it does highlight that there's a play-by-play commentator. Rick Nauer And then there was an Alice Graham League. And I know Rick Router's still here and there talking soccer on TSN today, looking overseas. And then they had sponsorships from Air Canada, Foster's Lager, Hyundai, and Gatorade. So that is another thing that you could highlight this league. I put all the links in the description, as well as where I get some of these graphics that I use throughout my videos. Also, the league adopted the standard, point system, the 2-1-0 or then 3-1-0, so that as well line draws instead of Americanizing point system with bonus points for two different categories. Not quite sure exactly what that means, but I know it's always 3 points for a win and 1 for a draw. But the teams, here are some teams that participated in this league over the years. Obviously Calgary, we're talking about. They played 3 seasons from 1987 to 1989. The Kickers and Strikers, they won the championship in 1987, based out of Calgary, obviously. Then there was the Edmonton Brickmen, who lasted 4 seasons from 1987 to 1990. The last league rank they had is 5th, and the best playoff rank was the semifinal. Then there was the Hamilton Steelers, who based out of Hamilton, that played from 1987 to 1991. They finished 5th, or they finished 2nd, and furthest they gone was a final. Then there was the Kitchener Spirit that played in Kitchener, Ontario. They existed the last 2 seasons in 1991. Best they did was 6th and went to a semifinal. And then there was the London Lasers, who were based in London, Ontario. They played 2 seasons from 1990 to 1992. The best they did was 5th and did not make the playoffs. Then there was the Montreal Spurs. There was based in Montreal. They played 5 seasons from 1988 to 1992. The best they did was 3rd and went to the semifinals. And then there was the North York Rockets. They were in North York, Ontario. They existed the whole league. They played 6 seasons from 1987 to 1992. Best they did was finish 2nd in the league and had a semifinal. Then there was the Nova Scotia Clippers, who only played 1 season. They were based out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, so there was a Atlantic team. They only played 1 season in 1991. They finished 6th and at least got to the quarterfinals. Then there was the Ottawa Intrepid, who are obviously based in the nation's capital in Ottawa. They played 4 seasons from 1987 to 1990. Best they did was finish 3rd in the league. Went to the quarterfinals. And then there was the Toronto Blizzard, who played in Toronto. Lasted all 6 seasons from 1987 to 1992. The best they did was finish 2nd and made it to the final. And then the Vancouver 86ers, who played all 6 seasons in Vancouver, British Columbia, from 1987 to 1992. As I mentioned, they finished 1st and they won 4 titles out of 6 in this league. And then there was the Victoria Vistas, who were on the island. They played 2 seasons from 1989 to 1990. Best they did was finish 4th and win a semifinal. And then the last team was the Winnipeg Fury, who played all 6 seasons from 1987 to 1992. They were the other team that won a championship, but the best they did was finish 3rd. So Calgary won 1 championship, Vancouver won 4, and Winnipeg won the other one. So those are all the teams that played in this league. And then eventually, as I mentioned, that this league gone through, financial issues and, dysfunction in the office. It seems to be some of these, smaller leagues that are more vulnerable to things like that, eventually they become history after 1992. I just say, notable players. There are 26 players in the Canadian Soccer League have been inducted into Canada Soccer Hall of Fame. From that group, 11 honored members made their professional league debuts in the league. As I mentioned, there was Bob Biothoto, Ian Bridge, Alex Branbury, who was a rookie in 1987. Then you had John Catliff, who was a rookie in 1987. Carlo Corzin, 1992 rookie. And then you have Nick Dazovic, Jason DeVos, 1990 rookie. Paul Dolan, Gary Gray. And then you have Landon Hooper, who was a 1987 rookie. Paul James, and then Bob Landaruski, Tina Lettieri, John Lamedis, 1987 rookie. And then you have Colin Miller, Dale Mitchell, Dominic Monabillo, and a lot of these Italian names, as you see, 1987 rookie. And then Pat Onstad, 1987 rookie. Paul Pecciello, 1989 rookie. Thomas Radzinski, 1991 rookie. And then you have Randy Reagan, Randy Samuel, Bianco Siergoda, Mike Sweeney, Carl Valentine, and then Mark Watson, who 1990 rookie. But there was no Nick Gilbert, who was not good enough to be in the Hall of Fame. But that's just a little touch on the Canadian Soccer League. And then I also found this website that I'll also put in the description below, on the rosters that has all 3 seasons of the 2 seasons of the Kickers and the Strikers. And I said the most notable name was Nick Gilbert, as in 1987 when we won the championship. Nick Gilbert wore number 10. He played 18 games and scored 11 goals. However, we do have Burke Kaiser, who played 28 games, and he actually scored 15 goals as a defenseman. So those are the other 2 big names. I say they'll highlight that Nick Gilbert played for Canada, but it doesn't say where Burke Kaiser played from, but that last name sounds German. And then in 1988, there Nick Gilbert once again was the leading scorer. He had 10. Yeah, actually not Nick Gilbert. He actually wore number 9 in this season. He had 6 goals in 26 games. But we had a John Reach who scored 10 goals in 20 games. And it doesn't mention where he nationals, but Nick Gilbert was a Canadian. And then in 1989, the last season when we were the Strikers, the 2 top scorers, we had 2 players that scored 11 goals. We had number 9, Andy Smith, who had 11 goals in 24 games. And number 13, Alex Percy, who had 11 goals in 12 games. As Percy didn't say where he's from, what nationality, but Andy Smith, who is from England. And that actually does list Nick Gilbert still on his roster in 1989. We had 8 goals in 13 games, so that's a touch on some of the stars we've had. And then there's the CSAL 1987.ca where I'll share some relics throughout this video and at the end as well. So that's all I have pretty much for the Calgary Kickers and Strikers, as they were a team, another professional soccer team that represented Calgary from the past, that played from 1987 to 1989. I would say it's a little lower profile from the Calgary Boomers from the North American Soccer League, but we're starting to see a trend that it's starting to get scaled down a little more, and it'll be scaled down even more when I get to my next episode, episode 12, where I'll just get all the soccer teams done in this series. As that in episode 12, I'm going to talk about the Calgary Storm and the Mustangs, and I actually do remember those teams existing, and I do remember that those teams, they played at the Glenmore Athletic Park near McMahon Stadium. So we've come from McMahon Stadium with the Boomers, as well as the Corral with the indoor team, and then they played at Mewata Stadium, where it's a little bigger than that, Glenmore Athletic Park, which is near where McMahon Stadium and Burns Stadium or Foothill Stadium is, where, yes, we'll eventually get to talking about some baseball teams in this series towards the end. I would say the Cannons, I would still say is the team that Calgary misses the most, but I purposely put that towards the end, which I made my introduction video talking about the teams that I'll cover in the series. But you do remember the Storm and Mustangs playing out of there, and that was the last of the defunct Calgary soccer teams before now the present day Cavalry that has been in the newly formed Canadian Premier Soccer League, which I say is just a level below from the Major League Soccer, and I would say the legacy from the North American Soccer League, which has the Vancouver Whitecaps, the Toronto FC, and the Montreal Impact. As I know, those are the only Canadian teams that are in that league, but the Canadian Premier League has teams throughout the country in smaller cities and markets as well that don't have the fan base. So yeah, I just gotta ask you out that's watching this, do you remember the Canadian Soccer League? Do you remember this Calgary team, the Strikers, Kickers? Even though this does not predate me, I was also young. I just didn't remember hearing much about it. I just learned about this team when I was mapping out all my episodes, but do you have any memories? Did you go to any games, or what do you liked or disliked about it? Or I ask you, or all the other Calgary soccer teams in the past. They're in the last episode where I talked about the Boomers, and then the next episode I'll talk about the Storm and Mustangs. That I do remember that, but once again, just like this team and the Boomers, not too much of a long history. So that's all I have for my Remember the Calgary Series for episode 11, talking about the Strikers and Kickers. So as I always like to say, if you want to follow along with this Calgary sports fan's journey, home of the Flames, Hitmen, Roughnecks, and Stampeders, and formerly the Kickers and Strikers. It just sounded better when I named the episode to talk about when I said the Strikers and Kickers, but it was the Kickers that were around first. And then the Strikers, and I don't know if you could say it's the same team or two different teams. I mean, one team folded, but then it got revived, with community owned, but then that only lasted so long, and then eventually, the league itself collapsed. As I would say, in North America, in general, is the only part in the world that isn't as obsessed with soccer in general, especially in Canada. I mean, there is still more kids, I would say, that play soccer than hockey, but that's just more because of it's a lot cheaper to play soccer, and there's not as much contact in soccer than hockey. But obviously, we're a lot more obsessed with hockey than soccer. But if Canada ever makes it to the World Cup one of these years, I'll have a reason to go to the bar and paint my face and have a few drinks and just enjoy the ride. I mean, I did remember playing FIFA. Actually, it was a 1998 game on the Nintendo 64. I actually did have Canada win the World Cup, and I think, I wonder if that will ever happen. Probably not, but you just never know. But that's why I have all my memories of soccer up to this point. And other things I also do on my YouTube channel, if you're also interested in, is personal vlogs, attempt to comedy, and I also do share my experiences when I'm on the road or at a sport event. So if that also sounds like you'd be interested to watch, to follow along with this Calgary sports fan's journey, what you need to do. Just make sure you hit like, subscribe. But I also have my other social media links down in the description below for other ways you can follow me and maybe get any tidbits on what I plan to do in future videos, or share any other things that will eventually make it on, or just other ways you can follow me to follow along this Calgary sports fan's journey. So as I say, I don't know, do we say go Kickers go Strikers go, or let's go Kickers, let's go Strikers, whatever we like to say. As I say, that's just my touch on and my brief history on this Calgary soccer franchise. So as I say, I'll see you in the next video, or on the pitch, or on the ice, or at the football field, or wherever the next Calgary team I'll talk about is going to be. So I'll see you then, and enjoy some other relics that I found that I will share in this video on the soccer teams. So, thank you.